Most musicians practice the entire song, from start to finish, again and again. 3 hours later, they feel productive, but they barely improved. Meanwhile, the top musicians in the world practice something completely different. Not the whole piece, not even half. Sometimes just 2 seconds of music, the hardest 2 seconds. The 5% that breaks everything. Violinist Itzhak Perlman once said something strange. When students practice a piece, they play it from beginning to end. When professionals practice, they play the mistakes over and over and over. And that tiny difference is why some musicians improve 10 times faster. The truth is brutal. Most practice is fake. You repeat what you're already good at. It feels smooth, comfortable, productive, wrong. Real improvement happens exactly where things fall apart. Today I'm going to show you the system elite musicians use to find that 5%. And once you see it, you'll never practice anything the same way again. Chapter 1. The Practice Illusion. Most musicians think improvement comes from repetition. Play the piece again, and again, and again. But Anders Ericsson, the psychologist who studied world-class performers for decades, discovered something disturbing. The best performers did less repetition than everyone else, but they improved faster. How? Because repetition isn't practice, it's performance rehearsal. You're simply replaying what your brain already knows. Your brain loves this. It feels easy, smooth, fluent. Psychologists call this the illusion of competence. When something feels easy, your brain assumes you're improving. But you're not, you're just confirming what you already know. Imagine learning a piano piece. Measure 1 to 50. You play it 5 times. Maybe you mess up at measure 23 every time. But you keep starting from measure 1. So what happens? You practice measures 1 to 22 perfectly 5 times. But measure 23, you practice the mistake 5 times. Congratulations, you just trained your brain to fail. Elite musicians refuse to do this. They hunt mistakes like predators. The moment something breaks, they stop. Immediately, no finishing the song. No pushing through, stop. Because that mistake just revealed something important. A weak neural pathway. Your brain doesn't know how to solve that moment. And that moment, that tiny fragment, is where all improvement lives. But here's the problem though. Finding mistakes is easy. Fixing them is something completely different. That's where the real system begins. Chapter 2. The 2-second rule. Watch a professional musician practice. It looks ridiculous. They don't play the whole song. They play 2 seconds. Stop. Again. Stop. Again. The same 2 seconds. 50 times. Why? Because they isolate the failure point. Psychologist Daniel Coyle studied elite training environments, Olympic teams, music academies, professional sports. He discovered something called deep practice. The best performers shrink the skill down to microscopic pieces. Not the whole piece, just the hardest moment. Think of a difficult piano run, 6 notes. Most students practice the entire phrase. Professionals practice note 3 to note 5. Why? Because that's where the brain stalls. That's where the mistake hides. Your brain learns through something called myelin. Myelin is insulation around neural circuits. Every correct repetition thickens that insulation. The circuit becomes faster, more automatic, but mistakes create weak insulation. The signal leaks. That's why a passage feels clumsy. Elite musicians fix this by isolating the exact moment where the circuit fails. Sometimes that moment is half a second. Concert violinists will loop a single shift between 2 notes. Again, 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 until the brain locks it in. Average musicians practice the entire mountain. Experts practice the slippery step. But here's the problem though. Even when musicians isolate the hard part, they still practice it wrong, which leads to the third principle, and this one feels completely backwards. Chapter 3. Slow is fast. When students reach a difficult passage, they do something predictable. They play it faster, trying to push through, trying to force it, wrong. Elite musicians slow it down, sometimes at 10% speed. So slow it almost sounds ridiculous. Why? Because speed hides mistakes. When you play fast, your brain can't process each movement. It just hopes everything works. But when you slow down dramatically, something interesting happens. Your brain begins to see the problem clearly. Finger placement, hand tension, timing errors. You notice things you never saw before. This is why classical teachers say something brutal. If you can't play it slowly, you can't play it. Slow practice creates perfect neural encoding. Each correct repetition becomes a clean signal. No noise, no chaos. And here's the strange part. Once the brain learns the movement slowly, speed appears almost automatically. Psychologists call this accuracy before speed. Motor learning research shows the brain encodes movement patterns better when they're performed slowly and correctly first. Trying to learn something at full speed is like trying to write neatly while sprinting. Impossible. Elite musicians master the movement slowly. Then they gradually increase tempo, like turning a dial, 60 beats per minute, 70, 71, 72, until the movement is automatic. But here's the problem though. Even with slow practice, even with isolating the hardest moments, most musicians still plateau because they're missing one final piece, and this one separates professionals from everyone else. But before we get there, hit subscribe before you forget. We break down elite learning systems here. Chapter 4, the 5% rule. The biggest difference between amateurs and elite musicians isn't talent, it's practice selection. Most musicians practice everything equally. Professionals don't. They analyze, they diagnose. They hunt the hardest moments. In every piece of music, about 5% causes 95% of the mistakes. The difficult shift, the awkward chord change, the strange rhythm. Everything else is easy. But amateurs keep practicing the easy parts. Why? Because success feels good. Failure feels terrible. But improvement lives in failure. This is exactly what Anders Ericsson called deliberate practice. Not repetition, not playing through, but targeted attack on weakness. If a violin concerto lasts 10 minutes, the hardest sections might total 30 seconds. That 30 seconds determines the performance. So, elite musicians spend most of their time there. Sometimes entire practice sessions focus on 3 measures. Concert pianists have admitted spending 2 hours on 8 seconds of music. Ridiculous? No, efficient. Because once the hardest 5% works, the other 95% becomes easy. But here's the final twist. Elite musicians don't just practice physically, they practice mentally too. Chapter 5, mental rehearsal. Top musicians often practice without touching the instrument. They sit quietly, eyes closed, imagining every movement, every sound, every finger placement. Psychologists call this mental practice. Studies from the Cleveland Clinic showed something incredible. People who practiced piano mentally activated the same neural circuits as people who physically practiced. The brain doesn't fully distinguish between imagination and action. Olympic athletes use this constantly. So do concert performers. Before a performance, elite musicians run the entire piece in their mind. They hear the notes, feel the timing, visualize the hardest passages. This primes the brain. The neural circuits activate before the instrument even appears, which means when they finally play, the brain already knows the path. It's like rehearsing a route before driving. No surprises, no panic. But here's the thing though, even if you practice the hardest 5%, even if you slow things down, even if you isolate every mistake, there's still one massive problem. Most people practice too much at once, and their brain can't keep up, which is why the fastest learners in the world use something called spaced practice. Instead of grinding for 5 hours straight, they practice in short bursts that permanently lock skills into memory. That's exactly what I'll break down in the next video.